Well, good afternoon, everybody. I guess it is afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. I'll be honest, I looked at the other room, and this room was more attractive. So you absolutely picked the right room. Not a good idea, by the way. My name is Mark Fordham, and this is Linda Souza, and we're going to be joint presenting this session today. You may also see me on occasion going viral as the singing cockroach for Central Desktop. I have nothing more to say than that.
If you haven't seen him as a singing cockroach, by the way, any of those three monitors out front or in the general session room from time to time, you'll see him pop up.
And I am signing autographs. I did, in fact, write that song. So
yeah, he did write the song.
Nobody's taken me up on that offer quite yet.
Somehow I earned the nickname Looming Head of Work by my graphic designer. I don't know how I got that name. But since I didn't have a looming head picture of myself, you can see my team actually drew a picture of me in stick figures with a looming head and wrote looming. So there you go.
You do, in fact, loom quite a bit. That is a true statement. So we want to kind of keep this fairly sort of casual, collaborative. We have some interesting things we want to share with you today, in particular around the topic of trust and relationships. And most importantly, what is the impact of a tool like Central Desktop? What kind of impact does it have on an organization? Specifically, how does it change the way people behave with one another, interact? What kinds of things are sort of prerequisite things to have in place in order for collaboration to really sort of catch fire and promote sort of the benefit to your organization? So we're going to talk about a little bit about what the heck were we thinking in this whole thing. We've ran a number of really sneaky experiments. We've lost a lot of friends at work. We want to share some of the findings with you about that. And then also kind of just what are some of the emerging themes and what this may mean to you as you go back to your organization. And certainly open it for a Q&A. But before we jump in, I thought it might be interesting for you all to sort of look around the room and get an idea on how long maybe you all have been in Central Desktop. So how many of you in this room have been using Central Desktop Social Bridge for a year or more? Central Desktop. More than 2 years. People that work at Central Desktop are excluded from something. No, I'm kidding. Okay. How about less than 6 months?
Well, that's a good percentage, actually.
And then another question, perhaps, as we jump in, is how many of you, prior to using Central Desktop, used a different, similar type of collaborative tool? Okay. And just so I can see the hands, the opposite. How many have never used a collaboration tool? Use it really high. Okay, awesome. The neat thing about that is, depending upon where you've come from, whether you're a new user or an experienced user, used something like this, a similar tool like this before, is a lot of the experiments we'll share with you are going to sort of indicate the experiences you yourself have. So I'll jump in really quickly and hand it over to Linda on the first experiment. But the question you may ask is, what the heck were we thinking? So I don't know about you, but about 2.5 years ago, I came to Central Desktop, and I had not used a tool like this before. And I remember one of the first things I started to realize is, why are all these people looking at my stuff? Why the heck are they clicking in it? Why are they downloading stuff that I'm uploading? It's none of their business. Mind your own beeswax. And it started to really aggravate me. I'd load something up. Somebody from a different department would look at it. I'd look at the auto log, and I'm like, who the hell is this person, Chris Goodrich, our product manager? I don't know this guy. I've never met him. It's aggravating to me. This open collaborative tool thing completely just sucks. I want to do my own thing. I want to be protective about it. But what I also came to realize is about 2.5 years into it, it's the opposite effect. It doesn't bother me. I embrace it. I look forward to it. There are any number of reasons for that. Your experience was similar.
Yeah, I did have a similar experience, and especially because I was newer to a tool like this. Coming into the company, I'd see a lot of people looking at my files, people not on my team or that I hadn't subscribed to it that I wasn't anticipating. Sometimes before the people I wanted to look at my stuff, somebody like Chris or Alan would actually come in and look at my stuff, and I wasn't sure, are they checking up on me? Are they wondering if I'm smart? I don't know. Productive, yeah. So there was some sensitivities there in the beginning.
So we decided to run some experiments. Unbeknownst to many of the folks in our organization, we started to be really crazy and load out a bunch of different experiments across a number of different parts of the tool, different departments in our company. And we found some fairly interesting things along the way. So the first of which, and we'll get into more detail as we go in, some of the things that we learned, some are surprising to you, some aren't, is that perceptions seem to be very different between a new and experienced user. So as we looked at the number of experiments we ran, both with experienced and people that are new to the tool, their perceptions on collaboration were very, very different. For example, people, like we've mentioned just a moment ago, that are new to the tool were highly sensitive to what other people were looking at, highly sensitive to people that were commenting on their work. It really bothered them for whatever reason. And then you go to the other side of that spectrum and you realize, I completely like this, it doesn't even bother me, I don't even pay attention to who's looking at my stuff anymore. We wondered, why is there such a curve between the new and the experienced user? We also similarly realized that sensitivities just seem to lessen over time. When we asked certain individuals, why does it not bother you anymore, they simply just said, you know what? At some point in time, almost like when you're in high school and you just sort of click into algebra, they had their algebra moment in the tool where all of a sudden just became, this is the way we now work, and I completely accept it. The third is and this is a theme you'll see pretty much throughout the entire presentation, is that curiosity was the main driver for why people were looking at things, and simply because they wanted to do their jobs better. Their observation of it and opinion was, the more I look at other people's things, the more I'm informed about the rest of the company, that I can better do my job in any number of projects that I'm participating in. And finally, and hopefully not surprising, because people aren't malicious by nature perhaps, their intentions were not bad. They were simply curious, they wanted to know more, they wanted to gather better feedback across the board.
We also found, predictably, that relationships really do matter. So once you had spent time, working with another person and understanding what they're looking for and building the trust, working together on projects, the way that you responded to them, either interjecting with some of your projects or looking at your files or whatever, collaborating with you in the system, the way that you responded to them was a little bit different because you understand their reasons for being in there and actually value and appreciate their feedback. We found that access into a workspace essentially was the equivalent of permission, or at least that's how it was understood by people in there. They figured if you put something in a workspace that I belong to, then it must mean it's because it's relevant to me and you don't mind me looking at it or participating. Otherwise, you would have put it somewhere else that I am not a part of. We found that inclusion is always better than exclusion in the majority of the cases. Sometimes we get feedback from other people that were not subscribed or that we didn't think maybe were even related to a specific project or discussion that actually helped us carry things forward and take it to another level. So really got a lot of great ideas from unexpected sources. And then finally, people get engaged when other people are engaged. So if they see people responding and commenting and they see a discussion really coming to life, then they're much more likely to join in on the discussion than if somebody just posts something and nobody responds. And then a lot of times we worry about social when it comes to the business. Are people going to start using this inappropriately? Is it going to become like a virtual water cooler or an actual Facebook where it's more about trivial, unimportant, personal things? And even though we do see that some of the status updates and things that we end up talking about online are of a personal nature, most of it is business related, and never has the communication been inappropriate in the work environment.
So let's talk about our first experiment, the attack of the stealth ninjas. We did send a couple of emails out, by the way. We have a session coming up later about the 9 collaborators. But out of curiosity, anybody in this room, have you all taken the quiz, or some of you taken the quiz? And leave your hand up reluctantly if you are a stealth ninja, in fact.
There's quite a few stealth ninjas in here.
Fantastic. They're not bad people, I promise.
No, not at all.
But we decided that for our first experiment, what we'd like to do is to take two different populations. First, we knew who our stealth ninjas were as a company within the organization. Some of them raised their hand a moment ago, proudly. But what we wanted to do is for a period of 2 weeks, we were going to stealth everything they did. For 2 straight weeks, we'd open up every day and click on everything that they posted into the system to make sure that our name popped up in the audit log. We also did the same thing for just any random number of folks across a multitude of departments, because we wanted to see what effect it would have on both the stealth ninjas and just the general population of people when people such as ourselves got all crazy and decided to look at every single thing they'd ever posted into the system. Here's what we found. The first of which is nobody cared. That surprised me a little bit. I actually expected some people to care. Primarily, the experienced users didn't care. But even the new users also didn't care. In our observation showed, because they're not paying attention at some point in time what people are looking at anymore. They're focused on their work, making sure something gets done, In some instances, they were also just posting something up when it was in a finished form across a sort of the spectrum of collaborators depending upon how they work. But we found that most people didn't care. They didn't even notice. Interestingly, many of the stealth ninjas don't even bother to click on the audit log, even though they themselves are the ones responsible for populating 90% of the audit log. And then, frankly, the most important thing I think to take away from the results standpoint was curiosity was the #1 reason that people looked at others' files. Some folks in particular said, I happen to just look at it because it was a topic that seemed interesting to me. I happen to look at it because I'd like to keep up to date on what maybe a head of a department's working on or somebody that I work on the team is working on. But mostly it was simply just curiosity. And there were just a multitude of takeaways as well that came from that.
Yeah. So, the first and foremost, we did find that whether you're new to collaboration or experienced really mattered. So if it's somebody who literally has just started, there's going to be a lot of sensitivities there around people looking at their stuff. But once you get to that certain level, which I think is not that far in, actually, just a few months in, then things start to feel comfortable again. And at that point, they really don't mind if you're looking at their things. The relationship is really important because they need to feel like you have some trust between you and you've got a relationship and they understand why you're looking at their things and they trust you as a person. So those are the two primary reasons that people really didn't mind if we were in there looking at their stuff. When we sort of turned the tables on them and asked the stealth ninjas, well, why is it that you are looking at people's things, we found that really they're just curious about things that they felt were relevant to them, but there were no ill intentions there. They weren't checking up. They were just curious about what was going on. And really they were gathering information to do a better job in their own daily work. And then finally, they don't really discriminate, so it doesn't matter. They're not targeting certain people. There may be some things they're more or less interested in, but basically they're looking at a lot of other people's things, not just yours.
And my personal example of that was actually, I keep bringing up Chris Goodrich. So 2.5 years ago, I started the company, and he's looking at all of my stuff. I'm freaking out. I'm like, who are you? But over time, as I developed a relationship with Chris, we worked on a number of projects together. Sort of going back to the second bullet, developing that trust relationship. I trust his intention. He understands what I'm working on. It actually became, quite honestly, a thing where I actually looked forward to the fact that he was looking at all the different things I've been working on, because it would communicate a sense of partnership across the organization. And so there was an interesting transformation of, I'm mad because I don't know you. I get to know you and understand kind of where you're coming from, and now I actually look forward to knowing that you're paying attention to the things that I'm working on, because it somehow additionally validates the work that I'm working on in the first place. Any of you have an interesting sort of stealth ninja moment, or can recall maybe early on when you jumped into the tool? And does this perception resonate with any of you? Did you have a similar experience where you were sort of wondering, why is everyone looking at all my things? Or a show of hands, perhaps. Were any of you in that boat at all? No? Didn't care? So we're crazy. This experiment? No? No? Susan, I know you had an interesting experience like that too. We have a quote later to mention that as well. We stealthed one of your posts. Excellent. And there it is. So the comment was, the biggest impact has been a shift in thinking and becoming more open with the things I'm working on. I really disliked other people seeing what I was working on in the past, and I protected things until they were ready to be shown. But now, I know people can stealth ninja everything, and so I've had to become more confident in what I was producing. Which I think is a pretty interesting thought.
Questions?
Yeah, based on your findings, do you think it's a good idea to, some of my users, I would assume that they don't know that there's an audit log there. Would you suggest that we be proactive and tell them there is an audit log so that they can have that sense of confidence?
Yeah.
In seeing that other people are actually looking at the work and that validates their work.
I would argue that it's almost part of a larger messaging around what collaborative work looks like and smells like and sounds like. And at the end of the day, if you're introducing a different way for people to work versus point-to-point, maybe email to email, or in more into sort of an open environment, it's one of the first things you want to articulate. Whether you explain to them there's an audit log that you can see and all that kind of thing may be a different question, but ultimately it's part of the larger messaging that we hope you'll take away from this, which is open collaboration is driven largely by curiosity, but it also produces better work. And so there's that entire messaging around it, whether again you communicate, hey, there's something, what do you call it, Big Brother's looking at your work or not. is different. But the more you can convey that sense of benefit, I think is probably the right way to go, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's also, too, the ways that you're using the audit log. So, yes, I've happened to see that people are looking at my stuff because I looked there, but normally I look at an audit log because if I send a file to somebody, for example, I want to see, have they looked at it yet? Because if they have, I'm not going to bug them just yet, but if they haven't, then I want to just sort of touch base and make sure, if I've got a due date or whatever. So I think the audit log, sometimes there's sensitivities, people are looking Big Brother or whatever, but I actually think there are a lot of really good benefits from having it there.
Good. Any other questions on that?
An interesting file. Yeah. So here, our setup was we were going to upload a file that we thought had a tantalizing name, and we wouldn't subscribe anybody to it, and we would just see who found it and decided they wanted to take it. So my file was actually called Pricing Strategy. It was a PowerPoint. Mark's was Implementation Strategy. Right?
Yes, and for both of ours, we conveyed early on in the PowerPoint presentation that the changes were going into effect in 2 days. And so we wanted to see kind of how people would react to it. By and large, most of the people that we actually then interviewed who happened to look at the file, download the file, preview the file, whatever, simply said that they most often found it in recent activity or in a digest. And so again, part of that whole access equals permission, because it was in a workspace they were a member of and they happened to see it in some sort of activity stream, it gave them sort of, one, the file name itself was curious, and two, that's generally where they found it.
And people do pay attention to those things.
Yeah. Whether it be the recent activity on your dashboard, an app block, or even the CD sidebar. It didn't bother them, by the way, that they weren't subscribed to the file. Again, it's that access equals permission thing. So whether they had been sent an email from the system saying, hey, you're subscribed to this, take a look, here's the action, that didn't seem to bother them at all. They still felt very open and willing and interested to download the file, and in some instances even comment on the file itself. And again, it's that curiosity thing. I don't think it's that far of a stretch to say that something like a file called Pricing Strategy, effective in 2 days, in and of itself is a very curious thing to download. And if I have been given keys to the castle, I'm certainly going to download that thing.
And people did. So key takeaways, don't obfuscate. Okay, so I use that word on purpose. Don't make things more complicated or confusing than they have to be. Actually, the way that you name your files will really help. So I always like to name my files things that make sense, easy for me to find, easy for other people to find and contribute to, assuming that it's not sensitive information that I wouldn't be putting there anyway. Again, because if people are in that workspace and they see you upload something that's of interest to them, they are going to look. If they're the curious sort, because they figure you wouldn't put it there if you didn't want me to see it. And then finally, what really drives collaboration in general is just people's natural curiosity. They want to get involved, and that, in turn, working together and communicating like that online does, in the end, drive better work.
Yeah, and in certain instances, people would comment on things, again, they weren't subscribed to it, but it was actually their feedback that would have affected a better decision in the long run. And so again, that whole openness and collaboration, one of the main benefits is you end up perhaps making better decisions based off of better feedback across a larger spectrum of people that you may not have intuitively decided to subscribe in the first place.
Yeah, this is actually one of the slides. We put 4 slides in the deck. This is the third slide. So people who found it then were expecting a phone call from us.
We made sure the pricing wasn't changing, and then like next couple of days, sales was going to freak out if we did that. So the third experiment we decided to run was the to-do list. And so both Linda and I posted our entire to-do list for the week in a workspace that everyone was a member of, and it had any number of things in there. I think one of the last things I put in my to-do list was, you've been fooled, this is an experiment, don't worry about things. I think I added some things that were kind of funny. But ultimately, we wanted to see, just throwing up a random file like that, not subscribing anybody, but again, maybe a curious thing, what would actually happen when we did that? Mainly when we asked a bunch of people who happened to look at mine. By the way, they cared more about my work than they did Linda's. I'm not
Nobody
sure.
cared.
Nobody cared about
it. I even updated them frequently throughout the day.
Nobody cared.
No one looked except Anita, and she's on my team, so I know why she looked.
Most often, people simply said that they were kind of disinterested in what was going on. For some folks at different levels in the organization, for my particular to-do list, they said it just gave them another entry into understanding kind of what's happening at sort of the senior level, making sure that they are kept abreast on what's taking place in the organization. The other interesting thing we found, and this goes back to our earlier point of sort of participation spurs participation, is some folks looked because other folks had previously commented on it too. And so there's this item that all of a sudden something starts to generate some buzz from an activity standpoint that then becomes sort of a magnet to participate, view, contribute, comment, or whatever. So activity tended to spawn activity over time, and you would almost see a swell of activity take place as certain people started to participate. And then again, most people really didn't care. So even though it was a workspace that everyone was a member of, at least for mine, I think I got a dozen sort of interested parties, half of which maybe were the stealthies. But the others just morbidly sort of interested and curious. And then really the takeaways here is that positive peer pressure is what helps to spawn participation. In certain instances, a couple of members of my team happened to look at it, and other members of my team saw that members of my team looked at it and thought, oh, I better look at it because other people on my team had looked at it as well. And so there's almost this positive peer pressure encouraging and promoting that kind of activity and behavior. This is just a comment from our CEO who started the year very fatigued by the fact that we continue to include him in a bunch of these experiments. And so he finally gave it up and said, I've been busted twice, but I love it. So that's nice for you.
The interlopers for number 4. So this was something where we wanted to sort of just jump into an email or a thread of discussion online that we had no business actually being part of, and see how people responded. So here again, for the newer users, it was a little bit of a hot button, but for people who have been around a while and who know us, it wasn't such a big deal. They actually didn't mind. They enjoyed that we were adding some value to the conversation, even if it wasn't originally directed at us. And it did help to spur further conversation, actually, on that topic.
Yeah, there are definitely times where people that had no business being in there saw ours, who also had no business being in there. And literally the feedback they provided was simply more exhaustive, more thorough, more intriguing, that in some instances would drive for a better sort of discussion and perhaps even a better decision in the long run. The fact of the matter here is, again, relationship and rapport is key, and that trust actually has to be there. So in certain instances where feedback was provided maybe to earlier users, they were a little bit more reserved, and why are they jumping into my discussion, and did I do something wrong, and all that. And the further you get more confident in your work, the less concerned you are with that over time. This also was interesting because oftentimes you may think, I'd like to get feedback from somebody, and I'd like to get feedback from these 5 people, which is fine. But if there's that entire other subset of people who may have good opinions, whether it's entirely relevant to them, you're completely excluding that. And so we also suggest is that there's great cross-departmental relationship building that can be had, especially virtually. So again, I'm going to get great feedback from people I don't normally work with if I'm more open-minded to who collaborates on a particular topic or subject. And then the more the merrier when providing obvious value, check before you wreck it. So in this particular takeaway, what we learned was the more people that were there, the more obvious value you're getting over time.
Has anybody had somebody sort of jump into a conversation they didn't really belong to in one of your documents or discussions? No?
But then the second one was a bit more narrow. And what might the difference be in terms of the volume of responses we get and the like? And so what we found is clearly the broader the topic, the more interest in collaboration you're going to get. And then secondly, snowball effect in responses. Similar for both in that the person solicited the response for a request for help rather, and it slowly just started to increase in activity. But then the more people started to contribute and participate, the thing just went crazy. And you got dozens and dozens of responses. And it really was almost a hockey stick moment. Slow to go, and then bam, all of a sudden it clicked. Because again, people see a buzz or a viral effect to something and decide, hey, this must be interesting. I'm going to jump in there and see what it's all about.
Yeah, and our takeaways here were people genuinely did want to be helpful. So even if it was a request for somebody not in the same department or someone that they didn't know, in some cases it was a new person. Adam, I used one of your posts as one of the examples. We asked for blogging help with favorite features for Social Bridge. People were willing to respond and help out. Also, the email notifications do help a lot. There were, as Mark mentioned, there were a couple responses early on, and then with one in particular, I remember in the next morning when people came in, somebody responded. I don't know if just everybody was at their desks or they were responsive or what, and then just like this big long string of people just started sending in their responses. So definitely when they see participation from other people, they're much more likely to jump in. And then also just ask for help or volunteers, and that seems to get us more responses. So the ones that were better responded to were the ones that actually said request for help or need volunteers or something like that, either in the title or in the body of the discussion.
One of our more clever sales folks who provided their feedback about this whole experiment. For those of you who know little HTML, you can try to interpret the top and bottom areas. So the next experiment was engaging the non-engaged. And for those of you, again, who are familiar with the 9 collaborators, you know that there's a collaborator type called the soloist. These are people who literally would prefer to crawl into a brown box and work over here, and only when they're done with their work might they maybe be interested in putting it up into the product. And so our goal was, let's see what would happen if we took these folks in our organization, we have some soloists, and overtly ask them to participate in something, whether it be a discussion or whatever, and just see what they would do. The results were somewhat interesting, at least to me, the first of which was only one of the non-engaged individuals actually participated. So in my particular example, I invited 4 people, but and they got the email notification, it was specific to them, but only one of the 4 actually decided to participate. The others didn't think that they had any value to add. So it was a request for some feedback or a conversation to get started. 3 of them said, I'm not even going to bother participating because I actually don't think I can add any value to this particular discussion. What ended up happening, which was somewhat surprising though, was that other team members jumped into the conversation and gave great feedback. And so again, it's back to that earlier point where people saw something that was interested, decided to participate and jump around. We got greater feedback, and by the way, they didn't even care that they weren't subscribed. It was in a workspace they were a member of, and so as a result of that, they decided to get involved. And the other interesting thing that actually I didn't expect was that it didn't occur to them, to the non-subscribed, that their feedback would not be welcomed. So when I asked, and I'll pick on Kenny for a moment, if you may have just left the room, I asked Kenny on my team, I said, why did you bother to provide some feedback on this? He said, well, it was interesting. Well, I said, did you know you weren't subscribed? He said, well, yes, I knew I wasn't subscribed, but I didn't care. I was still going to provide my value because it was a conversation that I think that I could contribute to, and that it would be the expectation that you would want feedback from a broad source, a set of sources. And then some of the takeaways.
So number 1, you really need to get to know your audience and the different collaborator types we mentioned. Actually, one thing we didn't put up here that I should add, I think if you want to pull in those people who are more reluctant to share it into the system, not only do you have to understand them and what types of things are going to motivate them, that they feel are really relevant and might motivate them, but I think it also takes repeated effort. You can't just try one thing and expect all of a sudden they're going to get in there. I know because, for example, our graphic designer is a soloist. She does not want to work in the system. Doesn't matter if she works for a company that this is what we do. But when we have conversations that are in the system, or if we need to exchange files, or even send things to printers or whatever, she's forced to do it in the system. So things that are relevant to her, and actually, she even said to me the other day, your system is handy. Tell someone important I said that. So eventually, over time, you can get them in there. It just takes repeated efforts for people who really don't like to engage or are very private or just reluctant to do that. Audit logs can be your friend, so you can sort of check out and see, did this person even look? Are they, will they even go that far or not? And again, back to the access as permission. If they're in that workspace, you might have other people who are jumping in the conversation, even if it's not directed at them. But we do find that having more contribute is better than having fewer. And I think this was Kenny's quote. Fun with status updates. Well, we use status updates quite a bit inside Central Desktop, and we've noticed some trends based on the things that we post and the types of responses. So we wanted to sort of actually gauge, how much of it is really personal, how much of it is business, does it really belong in the workspace, in the workplace? People love beer and teal. Some of the statuses that we had that were more along those lines got huge numbers of responses. So this is actually from last week as of end of day Thursday. Our most popular status update was actually a personal one, someone looking for advice for her mom buying a safe car, which generated tons of responses. But second most was actually Christy, your status update with a question about the product. So there is both the business and personal value in there.
Alex still has not purchased the car, so if you are interested in providing some additional feedback on the car that her mom should buy, she'd be eager to know that. I think she's narrowed it down to 2 options. But again, at the end of the day, the status updates are a fantastic tool for the primary goal of developing and building relationships with one another. What's really interesting in the organizations we see heavily use status updates, and especially with us, is you actually get to know a certain individual, their likes and dislikes, their sort of dispositions and sort of their personality, especially virtually, by measure of what they tend to post on status updates. We have a really awesome product guy named Mario who posts a ton of really interesting kind of more social but certainly appropriate status updates. And if you hadn't met Mario, you came to the organization, you read through his thread of status updates, you get to know him almost virtually, which is a really neat benefit of the social layer of the product, is that you really get to develop a relationship in some instances without even meeting them. So you can kind of begin to talk about likes and dislikes and all that even before you met them. We also realize that people actually have a desire to be social at work, even the introverts. Even some of the folks that tend not to interact with people, eat their turkey sandwich on the park bench a mile away from the office, still have some interest in being social. And because it's a safe sort of thing where you can kind of post a little thing up there, and it's not the threat, perhaps, of meeting people and being socially awkward in some instances, people genuinely do have a desire to be social. And so for those of you that may not be using the social elements of the product, particularly status updates, it is a really great tool to let people sort of convey a sense of who they are in the workplace. And then finally, again, it gives people an opportunity to express themselves, never really in inappropriate ways. So these folks are not generally using these things to share something of a more delicate nature, perhaps. How many of you guys are actively using status updates in your organization pretty regularly? So not a social group. Any particular reason why?
Where do they show up?
In many places, yeah. So certainly it'll show up in recent activity on your dashboard in any workspace that you're a member of. If you post it, it'll show up, and if people in their workspaces have created an application block called status update block, it'll thread it that way as well. So it can show up in a couple of different places depending upon how you have it set up.
The email digest as well.
I guess if we mostly communicate with Central Desktop via our email, they probably get them both in there.
Yeah, it's definitely an in-product sort of experience, and then the digest will show it as well.
That's usually where I see them if I'm not in there.
See, it's funny. I live out of my dashboard, so we're different that way.
Well, actually, I'm in my dashboard pretty much all day, but I tend to miss some of the status updates, so I sort of scan through the email digest, and that's usually where I find them.
Cool.
So I'm a little late to the party, but.
I was worried about interrupting, particularly for customers. I didn't want to interrupt their workflow with things that didn't, for me, I wanted to use it for status updates of what staff are available, almost like an instant messaging, to be able to say, I'm available, or no, I'm going to be gone for a meeting, or I'm in a phone call for an hour. But I didn't, if someone could just go to, I want to know what's going on with this person, and go and look at them, I thought it would be helpful, but I was worried that they keep getting interrupted.
Interrupted, and also maybe is it also a concern over sharing something that maybe you would prefer the client not see?
Yeah, so I could probably do it or I could turn it on for my employees only, but then not for customers. But then I could see a benefit for customers sort of getting to know people, but then you get back to the if my employees are sharing things that are more personal in nature and more, and we do on the phone,
yeah.
and we do, it's almost like I wanted a way to do it in the back door, and maybe we should be more open about it.
I've done a lot of client visits, and particularly with a lot of our agency customers who clearly have that concern over what do I share and not share with clients if I've invited them into workspaces. And the first thing I'll sort of hinge on a little bit is that there really hasn't been any instance where we've seen any inappropriate. Clearly they have a reservation up front like, let's get the tool out first, let's see how it works, and then maybe we'll get social. Because there isn't that element of inappropriateness, it does actually do what you want it to do, which is kind of develop that social relationship with them. Yeah. Great. Anyone else? Carl?
I'll just share two things. One of them is, in the social stuff being productive and collaborative. So I think that's part of it, that it's very much marketed as a social tool. I mean, I even noticed the way you positioned it. Fun with status updates. Well, we're not here to have fun. We're here to be a productive organization. So I think that's one reason. In our case, the other reason we don't use them is we do believe in being social and whatnot. We have a water cooler bulletin board for that, where people can control when they want to go look at it. And we do post things like, I'm looking for a car, is anybody selling one? There's pictures of my new puppy. But it's not being pushed to it. Where a status update is kind of like being pushed. It's like, okay, that's raising it to a level of importance that it really doesn't deserve.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. Specifically, you guys know your companies better than anyone else, and so you know what appetite somebody's going to have for introducing high bandwidth social, medium, or small. And the nice thing is that there are a multitude of different tools within the product that allow you to either be a little bit more structured or not structured at all, or somewhere in the middle. Very, very good point. Thank you.
I think for me, so again, as you mentioned, it might be different from company to company. I know for me, one of the benefits of status updates, I actually don't update my status updates that often, from time to time, but also seeing other people with their status updates. It's really important to me anyway, to like the people that you're working with, whether it's co-workers or clients or vendors or whatever. For me, it feels like it just sort of strengthens that bond. Again, as long as you don't take it to inappropriate levels. But we haven't seen that happen. But yeah, we use it a lot within Central Desktop.
Yeah.
I think we have some fun ones, fun examples. This is actually the most popular status update ever that I could find.
Oh, that was mine, wasn't it?
That was yours. Yes. That was yours. And this was the second most popular, also yours.
Literally, a car came by and wanted to take me to Betty Ford after that, so I don't do those anymore.
This was our third most popular, and we're still wondering why Corey Osborne likes cats.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about, again, sort of the summary and the takeaways. We've talked a little bit about them, so these things are, again, kind of being a little bit repeated, but perceptions are different between new and experienced users. Sensitivities lessen and change over time. Curiosity is sort of that main driver of collaboration, which good collaboration then delivers, kind of what Carl was mentioning, a better product, whether it's a decision, whether it's a direction, whether it's trying to brainstorm. Intentions among people are good. These are not folks who are trying to be malicious if they're looking at things that they're not explicitly been subscribed to. Relationships absolutely matter. There's that learning curve from new to experienced users that as you develop a trust relationship with somebody, you actually look forward to their participation. Access equals permission. It's the way that the product is structured and the way that there's an open work area that you can invite certain people in. And by measure of doing that, you are implicitly saying, I'm happy for you to collaborate among any number of things within this workspace. That inclusion is always better than exclusion. Again, you get better decisions, you get better feedback, you get better direction. People get engaged when others are engaged, so there's that viral component. It's one of the main reasons why activity stream and recent activity are so important. It gives you a sense to see what's happening, but sometimes you'll catch something you may not have been a part of, which will then cause you to participate. So there is that sort of viral component. And that people absolutely keep communication appropriate. So that's all fine and good, but what do you do with this kind of information as you go back into your organizations and take some of these sort of cultural components to play?
Yeah, and this first point is really as you're bringing new users onto the system, whether you're just extending it, rolling it out to more new users or people who are joining your company, for example, and haven't been in an environment where there is open communication, and maybe they're a little bit hesitant at first, maybe they're a little bit reluctant or feeling kind of private and want to keep things to yourself. You really just have to set expectations, sort of set the stage with them. This is why we do this, and yes, you might see people looking at your stuff, but it's okay. We're not trying to check up on you or a big brother. You know, there's a reason. It might be people are curious or they just want to make sure that they're keeping up with what's going on in the company. And as long as you're patient over time, I think those perceptions do change and those sensitivities that people initially feel when they're new and coming on board. Over time, they get a lot more comfortable with it once that relationship and the trust is built up there. We think embrace broader collaboration. So again, this just goes towards being more inclusive where it makes sense. So if somebody else jumps into your conversation, be open to it. We found that some really great ideas can emerge that way. I'm not saying subscribe everybody in the company to everything you do, because that will just overwhelm people. But if they are interested and curious and have something that they want to contribute, we find that being open to that actually will help over time. Don't be afraid of encouraging interaction among people. So again, this just sort of gets the ball rolling and starts to bring things to a next higher level.
Yeah. Escaping the burden of knowledge and myopia. So specifically, what we're trying to convince folks of here, I'm trying to remember this bullet point.
Sorry. I think we sort of all have kind of like the burden of knowledge. We know what we know, but we get in our own little silos almost. As much as I hate to say that, even though we're contributing, but when you do open it up a little bit, sometimes there are some ideas that come up that are maybe not within the confines of what you were thinking. They're a little bit outside the lines, but sometimes that's sort of the motivation that you need. So in this case, I think opening it up and being inclusive really can help you.
As far as know your audience is concerned, the benefit of we're going to have the 9 collaborator session later, which is going to give you a specific tool to help you figure out what types of collaborators you're working with. So, for example, in the instance of the siloist, knowing that they're a siloist may alter the way in which you ask them to participate in something. Maybe you narrow the topics that you ask them to participate because you know that those are the topics they're interested in. Maybe the way in which you solicit feedback from them by changing the name of the title in the discussion or the file itself. But it's really important for you to understand who your audience is so that you can maximize the level of participation and activity that you get from them. And then collaboration at the end of the day is built on relationships. All Central Desktop is a tool. Collaboration is a cultural phenomenon that takes place across an organization, largely driven by curiosity. And I know Carl's going to be speaking to this tomorrow as well, that talks about what are the ways in which you can truly build out a collaborative culture in a way that kind of delivers the benefits we've been talking about. And I think that's it for now. Any just general questions about the experiments we ran, findings we came up with?
Or experiences on your own side, similar or different?
I'm just wondering, when you're talking about sharing things across, you folks post these things that people are looking at, do you have a space that the entire company is involved in? Is that what?
We have a number of those.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how that.
Yeah, so in our world, we have a number of workspaces that pretty much everyone subscribes to. It's somewhat departmental. We have a fairly open, kind of transparent way we do work. So most everybody's a member of my implementation services workspace, my product workspace. We have a company-wide intranet. But by and large, my team's doing 85 to 90% of the work in the workspaces that are for them.
Right.
But other people,
including.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the way we're structured in marketing, for example, we've got both. So I've got this one workspace called marketing planning, where it's literally just the marketing team and like one of our contractors, and we do the bulk of our work there. But then we have this workspace called marketing calendar, which is where we publish everything for the entire company. Like if you need to know when an event is, or if we're emailing people, or you want to pick up some product literature or whatever, it's all in this one workspace. So when we were running the experiments, I was pushing things to the marketing calendar space.
Yeah, we have a couple of private ones as well.
Services and stuff. Yeah, or internet.
Right. Yeah.
I thought this discussion was interesting about dashboard versus email digest, and I think the medium is the message a little bit in that it provides context if you're looking at it on the workspace versus on your dashboard versus in your email. And I wondered if you guys had a gut on how people are accessing this. You have your feeds on your account page and feeds on your intranet, and it's all relevant to you, but you're probably not going to be bouncing between all those different spaces. So would you have a gut on where people would be seeing this, and that might inform how you structure that content a little bit?
Yeah. Not any hardcore statistics. We can certainly pull that because we capture clickstreams and all that. Just on the experiments alone, we tended to find most people were relying on the aggregated version of the recent activity, whether it be a dashboard or a CD dashboard or even the digest, versus the recent activity, which, by the way, you actually have to configure in the workspace in order for it to be there anyways. And so my gut tells me, just given this and kind of what I know, that it's more on the aggregated version than not. Yeah. Because to your point, they don't want to miss something, and the only way to kind of prevent that from happening is to look at the whole suite of information that's being pushed to you.
So you're saying from my dashboard, the aggregated version?
My dashboard or the CD sidebar, those
Yeah.
that have that turn on.
I know I personally use my dashboard a lot, and then I just things that I miss, I pick up in the email digest.
Yeah. 2 minutes? I know you're going to be
Caitlin has a question.
Well, very good. Well, we're going to be here a little bit afterwards. I know we're going to get set up for the next session in about 10 minutes, but really appreciate you guys being here. Definitely pull us aside in the lobby if you want to learn more about the experience that we ran. And I'll just make one quick reminder to please continue tweeting your experience here at Collabosphere to be entered in to win the flight over Santa Monica Bay prior to tonight's dinner. Linda has all the details.
You can bring a friend
Yep.
with you, actually. So if you win, you can go by yourself, or you can take somebody with you.
It is a professional pilot flying the plane. It's neither of us.
No.
So you're in good hands, FAA approved. But really, thank you so much for joining us today, and the next session will start at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.